Welcome back, Religion Online. I'm Rabbi Joseph Batas.
And I'm Deacon Kevin McCormick.
We have on the conference line Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, author of the book A Battle for the Soul of Islam. And Dr. Jasser's book is published by Threshold Editions and available in print or as an ebook. Good morning, Dr. Jasser.
Good morning. It's always great to be with you.
Well, I said to you before, it seems that we're telling variations of the same story. We now have Jews who were massacred, a Druze who was killed. We have, in Kenya, latest report now, I guess Christians who were massacred.
On a bus, traveling out, and they boarded the bus and declared who was Islamic and Muslim, and they shot 19 men, 9 women.
You know, so the names change, the stories are horrendous, and we keep asking the same questions. Where is the Muslim outcry? Why aren't people marching and saying this is not us, and we have to do more to separate ourselves from them? And we look at you, and you're an inspiration because you're the one there. But where's everybody else? That's the question.
Well, I think the hopelessness is coming from the fact that our leadership has no strategy, and we can't even make the diagnosis. I mean, look at this horrific attack in Jerusalem where 4 rabbis were killed, and you look 2 weeks before, Sheikh Qaradawi, who has 60 million people that listen to him, on November 7th, on his website called for blood to flow in the streets of Israel for a jihad against the Jews. He called for that 2 weeks before that attack. And then Hamas now, in the wake of that, has in its media glorified them and said that these were martyrs and jihadists that did an act of bravery against the Jews. And this is being glorified in most of the Palestinian Hamas-controlled media. So to say that we don't know these are random acts, we can't do anything against it, is absurd. So until America and the West, which is really, I know our Muslim population is small, but we can do things here that can change the world. And we just don't have a president, a media, an academia, any of these major institutions of thought leaders that are getting their head around the fact that this is political Islam, this is a supremacist doctrine, it's not just a small wing. ISIS didn't come out of thin air, Hamas didn't come out of thin air. These are normal byproducts of the Islamist ideology being taught by Saudi, by Al-Azhar, and by so many large movements, Islamic republics and others, and we don't have a public that has a national consensus yet that political Islam is the problem, it needs reform, and a reformed modern Islam is the solution.
Dr. Jasser, could you just help me with this? How does killing defenseless people in prayer or pilgrims on a bus make you a hero? I can wrap my head around the fact that you fight on a battlefield and you destroy your foe. I can wrap my head around that being heroic. On some level, I may not agree with it, but I can understand it. A man in prayer, men and women coming home. How does that translate if you're not a madman?
Well, this is the battle. The battle is against Islamo-patriotism. These Islamo-patriots believe that what they've done is they've dehumanized every individual that's not amongst them. Even those of us that are reformists are being labeled as apostates. We've left, and we're not human. We're part of some conspiracy. And by dehumanizing them, any act against these individuals becomes an act of bravery, even though it's against women and children. And that's the problem with tribal supremacism. The Nazis did it. It's classic fascist warfare in which any individual becomes a soldier, even though these are children and women. And this is the corruption of their ideology. And Muslims need to call this out as not only being barbaric and inhuman, but the fact that it's being derived from a religious supremacism. And until we recognize that the tribalism of this religious supremacism is what's driving this ideology and driving these acts, and that it is our Islam that's doing that. It may not be my Islam, but the collective Islamism is dehumanizing individuals to where Nidal Hassan and Hamas and all these groups, individuals are doing things that may seem horrific to us and to modern people, but the acts themselves are glorified because they their victim mantra is so dominant of their mindset that it becomes anything they do becomes something they glorify. It's just so twisted and psychopathological. But yet, if you understand the ideology, you see why it keeps coming back every week.
I'm sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah.
You see why the rabbi? Forgive me. You see why the madman spews forth his reality. But then people pick it up, and then how do they not label it as mad? I will leave that as a rhetorical question, but that's what
let me make it worse.
Let
me make it worse. Then you have the leadership of the Palestinian Authority that continues on this path of glorification by naming public places after these murderers and calling them martyrs. I mean, when do people assume responsibility for challenging this behavior? I mean, you're great at what you do, but I look at all the others who just, they come with this political correctness. Now, you use the word the phrase political Islam, Islamofascism, and that's very important. I got to tell you, there are times we use it here and we get calls. Wait a minute, Islamophobia. You can't.
Whoa,
you can't use that word. Don't use the word Islam. Call them extremists, terrorists. Don't use Islam. I mean, what goes on here when you can't even call it honestly without being called out?
Well, this is the issue. You're not going to have a movement of Muslims to begin to move the needle of what's happening in our communities and our consciousness until more of us wake up. And I'm sorry, the rest of America is giving Muslims a pass. You know, every week now, Bill Maher, I mean, it's not just conservatives. Bill Maher is addressing this, and he has Muslims on that are just apologists. You know, it's not a problem. You're demonizing Muslims. It's Islamophobia. He was almost not going to be able to give a speech in Berkeley because he addressed this and was called an Islamophobe. I mean, this is coming both from the left and the right, and the denial is so pathological that until Muslims get held accountable and told that your religion is being demonized by a large movement, and until you get a hold of it, we are going to be much more critical and expose the realities of what is being taught in your scripture according to Hamas and according to ISIS, and you need to show us why that's not your scripture and why that is not Islam, not just deny it and dismiss it, and demand that it be done at universities and media and elsewhere in government to talk about it, have hearings in Congress about security clearances for Muslims, other things. All of these things can play a role in changing the American mindset that the consensus in America has to be that we demand that Muslims domestically and globally begin to reform.
So people listening to this say, Dr. Jasser, we're with you. You're right. But between the saying it and the doing it, there's a tremendous gap in this country and I think around the world. So what should people be doing? Someone said recently, 10% of the Muslim population is involved in the extremism. So if you have 1.5 billion, what is that, 150 million? That's a significant number. But if it's 10%, the other 90% should be doing something. What about all the others, the non-Muslims? Give us an action plan of what we could be doing to change, the scenario.
Well, I'll give you two examples quick. One is America was founded finally by people that decided they needed to mobilize against theocracy. Fast forward to Egypt's second revolution. What finally mobilized Muslims in Egypt against the Brotherhood wasn't Mubarak. He as a dictator mobilized the population against him, but then when the Brotherhood took control, they realized their society was being destroyed by theocrats, and they got mobilized as a unit against theocracy. Now, did they know what to do with it once they got it? No, they went back to another military dictatorship. So the problem is that we need to my biggest liability or obstacle is that the Islamists know how to unify around religion. I'm trying to unify all the other folks around a concept of liberty, and we're so divided as non-Islamists it becomes difficult. So we need to unify the non-Islamists. And you said 10%. I'm sorry, the threat in our community is 30 to 40%. The Islamists, and when they vote, are able to get 30 to 40% of the vote. The 10% are the militant ones that believe that the ends justifies the means through terror and violence. The bigger problem, I think, are the nonviolent ones, like the Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, and others. These are apologists that believe in the Islamic State and are going to do whatever they can in a nonviolent way to achieve that means globally.
Last week we were talking about dialogue, and I mentioned that someone attended a dialogue or proposal for a dialogue, a Jewish-Muslim dialogue, and one of the conditions proposed is that we not talk about the Middle East. Can you imagine? This is going to be
I don't
some.
mean to
No,
laugh.
no, no.
Forgive me.
It is a
It's
joke.
inappropriate.
But the dialogue is a joke. When you sit down with someone who has, particular feelings about issues, and you can't talk about what really matters here, what kind of dialogue do you have? You have a cookie and milk session. That's all you have.
Well, I mean, you look at this letter to Baghdadi, people will say, well, look, the Muslim community has spoken up. 130 imams signed this letter to Baghdadi.com. That letter condemns ISIS, but it has a full-throated defense of the caliphate. But, Baghdadi didn't put the caliphate right. It has to be a consensus of leaders. Jihad, 2 pages on jihad, on how there's a right way to do jihad and not the way they're doing it. Women has only 1 paragraph, never uses the word equality. So actually, that letter, I would tell people to read it. It's a testimony to the people who signed it, are the Brotherhood movement in the West, who are very afraid that their movement is being outed by ISIS as a militant radical movement, and they're trying to, rally the troops to sanitize it as some kind of democratic movement, when in fact it's supremacist. So until we identify the ideology, Caliphism, jihadism, and we find Muslims that are willing to take on those ideas, not just the violence, you're going to see actually this movement is growing as ISIS grows.
And you also need an administration in Washington that has the courage to speak clearly, not ambiguously about the problem. Because, I see this kind of diplo speak, where, we talk about, the need for peace, the cycle of violence. We have all the things, but it does not address the core issue. I
mean, Rabbi, you read the letter that our president, horrific, I can't tell you how hurt and just shocked I was to see this letter he sent to Khomeini.
Yeah.
It's a letter that says, please don't think that we're going to anyway subvert your interest in Syria by going against ISIS. I mean, these are presidents of an Islamic republic who, as you know, to Bush and other presidents, has sent letters trying to convert them to Islam, and we're sending letters of appeasement and telling them that, meanwhile, we all know that you can't get rid of ISIS unless you get rid of Assad. And therefore, that's a green light to Iran saying that, well, we're not going to really do anything.
And we're negotiating with Iran, about nuclear capability, and you look at this and you say, it seems hopeless. It seems that you have this determination to have any deal, even though, the mantra is no deal is better than a bad deal. It looks like a bad deal is on the way. And what I find even more troubling, very candidly, is we have politicians who supposedly are supposed to represent us who don't say a word. There's some of them who always claim they're behind the scenes working on the issue. The problem is when you go behind the scenes, you can't find them. They're so far behind the scenes.
And these things are all connected. Yeah. To say that the way we treat Khomeini is not related to the Islamist movement in Jerusalem, in America, and all these, it is all related. CARE is on press TV in Iran all the time. Hamas gets funding from Iran. All of these things are connected because they're Islamo-patriots that believe in jihad, and they see that we are not interested in engaging their populations that they try to manipulate through their own media and ideology. So they're growing while we're sort of in retreat.
How sad that Bill Maher becomes the model of what needs to be done. And I've criticized him in the past for other things that I thought he was outrageous on. But I my hat's off to him, and I have to say in this area, Mr. Maher has the courage to stand up and see things for what they are, and to say, you know what, the emperor has no clothes on, and let's knock it off and let's get to reality. So kudos to him.
And he's willing to accept, all of the the denunciations that come his way because of it. He's willing to stand up and take it.
It's a brave new world where McCormick supports Maher.
All right.
We've been pounding on his producer's door because he's saying the right things, but he's sort of on the anti-religious side versus the pro-Islamist apologist, and in between he puts the apologists in there, and none of the reformers to take them on from a Muslim perspective, which has been problematic.
People want to learn more about your work. Where should they go, Dr. Jasser?
Our website is aifdemocracy.org, AIF as in forum, democracy.org.
I've often said to people, you want to have dialogue? Get Dr. Jasser in the mix. Talk to people who talk openly and honestly. Then you'll have real dialogue. The others are just, it's like a show. They're just, putting on costumes and playing a role, but they're not really telling you the way it should be. All right. Dr. Amzouni Jasser, president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Thanks once again.
Thank you. God bless.